Hi, I'm Lily Gonzalez, Executive Director of the San Antonio Book Festival. Welcome to this event called All You Need Is Love, I Wish, with Yamile, Saied, Méndez, and Lilliam Rivera. Lilliam Rivera is an award-winning writer and author of the young adult novels Never Look Back, Dealing in Dreams, and The Education of Margot Sanchez. She grew up in the Bronx and currently lives in Los Angeles. Yamile Saied Méndez is a football-obsessed Argentine American who loves meteor showers, summer, astrology, and pizza. She lives in Utah with her Puerto Rican husband and their 5 kids, 2 adorable dogs, and 1 majestic cat. Furia is her first young adult book. Lilliam's and Jamile's books share stories of protagonists who would risk it all for the ones they love. On a personal note, I wish that when I was a teenager or a young adult, I had books like these. So please take advantage and sweep them up, click that Buy the Books button below, and support our independent bookseller, Nowhere Bookshop, and these writers. Independent bookstores have had a hard time during the pandemic, so we hope that you'll support them, and of course, Liliam and Jamile by clicking that Buy the Books button below.
Well, I want to thank Lilliam and Jamila for being here today. I'm so excited to share your books with the San Antonio community. I know that the young adults that are just going to love to hear about these topics. And to kind of echo something that I read in Shamila's book, I felt like the first couple of pages almost called, your ancestors to the forefront of the book. And so I'd like to take that moment to just kind of call them to our conversation. And if Lillian would like to, I know that in your book later, you also bring back the story of the mother. And I wanted to just kind of take a minute, and if you'd like to say the name of somebody you'd like to call into this conversation to be one of your angels, feel free to do so right now, both of y'all.
I would like always. I call upon my mother's guidance and protection. She passed on almost 8 years ago, which seems incredible to me. But I always feel her presence, and every time people ask me if my character Camila Hassan is based on my life, my lived experiences, I say that of course Camila has a lot of me in her, but mostly has a lot of my mom. And so I dedicate this book to my mom, and because she was always my first cheerleader and an example, and so I, like always, I call on her to protect me and guide me in everything I do.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, when I think about that, and I'm always very open about those kind of experiences, is that I always think about Puerto Rico and my family in Puerto Rico and my ancestors there. My last big trip was in January to the island, and I left before an earthquake, after feeling an earthquake. So in my head, in my mind, I'm always thinking of the island. I'm always thinking of the people there, and so they're always around me. There's, if you, I can't show you, but my whole in front of me, what I look at when I'm starting my work is images of the island, from the island, and images of people from there. So they're always with me.
Thank you. Thank you. And I call Rosalba, my grandmother from Mexico, who um, gave me so much that I carry in my heart and my earrings. So
I love it.
so I loved these books, and I in both of them I laughed and I cried and felt kind of heat of a little excitement with the love, and they were wonderful, wonderful books that really took us on this journey. And I really feel like that the places that you talk about become characters. When teachers talk about setting, they're like, where did it take place? Kids think of it in that sense, but when I read these books, I felt like the places were really characters in the story. So my question, I want to start with Lilliam. Why did you choose New York as your setting? I know you live in Los Angeles, right? And I know there are a lot of Puerto Ricans in New York, but why New York? Why did that setting come alive so much for your story?
So I've lived in LA for a long time, but I'm from the Bronx. I always love to say that. So I'm from the Bronx, and I've, I go back and forth. Before pandemic, I would go back and forth because my family's there, and I also have family in Puerto Rico. And so it was really, when Hurricane Maria hit the islands, it affected my family. It affected my uncle, who we couldn't get a hold of, who's 80 years old, and we were unable to reach him. And I took to Twitter and Facebook and just tried to find a way of getting to him because we had no idea what happened, or how he was affected. And so this all happened, and I didn't know how to deal with my depression and rage at how the government was handling what happened to my people and my family. And so, as everyone, I coped through writing. And so I had to find a way of writing about Puerto Rico, about Hurricane Maria, about depression, about anxiety. And I found it a way of writing about it without it being deep and dark. And these settings are my characters. I have so much love for the Bronx. I have so much love for Puerto Rico. And so I'm always thinking about how can I bring that love and showcase that love to everyone, so that they too can come and see it as I see it, as a place full of magic and full of beauty and full of emerging love between two young people. Why not? So that's what I'm always I'm striving to do that in my work as much as possible. So it's a love letter to these two places that have shaped my work, my writing.
Beautiful. Well, it's you could tell when you're reading it that these places really come alive and not just are the backdrop of the story, but shape the story, that are the story. That came out really clearly. And I felt the same with Yamile's book. When set in Argentina, I was like, okay, well, I've never been there. Let me see what this journey takes me. And I felt very much immersed with the dialect, with the location descriptions. Tell me how you get into that depth with the location where it becomes so alive.
Well, I think Furia was a special experience for me because although it's not my first book published, it's the first novel that I attempted to write. So I started writing it back in 2006 when my fourth child was born. I was a young mom. I was 28 and I had 4 kids under the age of 5. And I was homesick because I hadn't been back home for a long time. But by this time that I started writing, my parents had moved to Utah, which is where I live now. So with Argentina and one of its constant economic crises, it was impossible for my family to travel with all my little kids. So I hadn't been back in a long time and I was extremely homesick, but in a way that like I felt the longing for my place, like in my flesh. And so when I had been wanting to be a writer all my life, but I didn't know if I had a story in me. And one day Camila just popped into my mind, and she was this girl who wanted to play professional soccer. And of course, the location of where the story would take place came to me naturally. It would be in Rosario, and it was my way. Writing was my way to go back home. So I feel like all that longing is reflected in the book because I felt like I was walking the streets of my barrio. Like Yamile, I too grew up in government housing, Barrio 7 de Septiembre, which was created in the 80s for families who had somebody working in the metallurgic industry. So none of my parents were in that industry, but my godfather worked in a metallurgic factory, and he was awarded this apartment by the government, and he transferred it to me because I'm his goddaughter. So I just, although when people hear about government housing, they have this idea of what goes on there. They call them the caseríos in Puerto Rico. And I know that because my husband's Puerto Rican, so we spend a lot of time in Puerto Rico. People have this idea of what happens in El Barrio. And I wanted to show what I experienced. And because even though I experienced a lot of hardship and and difficult times, there was also a lot of happiness. And I look back on my teenage years with a lot of fondness. And that's why I miss going back home. And every time I go back, although none of my family members lived in El Barrio anymore, our friends still live there. And so I go back and visit every time. And also because football or soccer being such an intrinsic part of my novel, and Rosario is one of the world capitals of football, with Leo Messi hailing from there as well, and other super famous soccer stars. And all of these stars have always been men. And not a lot of people know that women live and breathe and experience soccer just in the same way that men do, although we've been barred from enjoying the sport as players, sometimes even by law. It's unbelievable to know that years ago there was a law stating that women could not play soccer, or you would go to jail. So the early futboleras would play in circuses. They were the spectacle. That was the only way they could enjoy it. Or they would dress as men. I mean, we're talking only 50 years ago. For a country that has already had several women presidents, we have been still dealing with this inequality in sports. So Rosario was my only logical choice for me to set it, because although you can perhaps incorporate Camila's story and see it in different places in the world, because football is such a universal sport. But the details would change, of course, if you change the place. I was talking to a writer a couple of days ago, and she was saying how when her book was published from the UK to the United States, they changed the location to an American city. And I thought, oh my gosh, I could never do that, because my book would mean a completely different thing if it had been set in a different place, because the story would not make sense if I told the story of a Latina girl here in Utah. The difficulties and the situation would be completely different from a girl in Rosario. And I also wanted to show a different face of an Argentine girl. I'm just thrilled with the cover that it shows a brown skin girl from Rosario, because a lot of the media that we get from Argentina in music or movies or TV shows, you see the more European looking Argentines, which gives people this false picture of what Argentina really is. So it was very important for me to show a character from this particular location front and center.
I love that you talk about the cover, because I feel like both our covers are so striking in that sense. Like to me, it was so important to have, we were talking about Afro-Latino characters, and I was like, oh, I was lucky that I was involved in the sense of like being able to give as much input as possible when it comes to that cover, because I was like, I wanted to make sure that it was as true to the characters that I was writing about. And I'm sure, I don't know, did you have hopefully the same input into the covers as you?
I was so lucky, because when I saw the first pencil sketch of Furia, I had no idea who they had commissioned to be the illustrator, but I was just in shock. It's the artist of my cover is Rachel Baker. And I was just in shock. And then Camila's expression was as striking, even in a pencil sketch. And I cried, because her features, and I had sent pictures of my nieces.
Right.
Like a marker of what I would like, and not knowing what the artist would come up with, and what I saw, the strap of her sports bra, the little details, and just the expression, again, above all, it made me super excited that I got to share an Argentine girl that looked like the girls in my family.
Yeah, it's a big deal. We talk about representation, how it matters, but it's amazing when you get like a reader who's like, oh, here's a picture of, taking a picture with the book, and they look like the cover. Like, it's just like, I'm like, that to me is like tears, because I'm just like,
every time
they're able to grab, right? They're able to like see themselves on a bookstore, in a bookstore. It's an amazing thing.
Yes, I've had on Instagram, sometimes people tag their friend or whatever, oh, this looks just like you, and I've seen like the person side to side with the book cover, and that's always such a surreal experience, like, oh my goodness. Or somebody whose name is Camila, or an Argentine girl of Arabic ancestry, which is, like my experience as well. And so that's so specific. And that was, some of the excuses that I was given in the past for why a publisher could not take in this book. Oh, it's so specific, but then the specificity made it so powerful for when people.
I mean, absolutely it does, because when you have something that's just, I mean, the details in both books, but specifically, the mate and the chow and different things that give you that whole sense of that place, it brings the characters to life in a way that you couldn't have if you transported them. And I think maybe that has to do with the idea of, these Our Voices stories, right? This idea that, although we can sit in a Latina or Latinx panel, like we each come with different perspectives, and those perspectives, the specificity is what actually makes it better and doesn't make it worse. It doesn't defile it. It actually lifts it up. Exactly. I love both the covers. They're both so beautiful. And I think that the ethnicity does play, and even colorism plays a role in both of the books. Lilliam, can you tell us a little bit more about how you dealt with that in Never Look Back?
Sure. So just, a quick background, like Never Look Back is a retelling of the Greek myth Orpheus and Eurydice, but it's set obviously in the Bronx and in certain situations in Puerto Rico. So it was really important. So it's told in alternating points of view. And so you have Yuri, who's Puerto Rican, who's displaced from the islands, who is now spending the summer in the Bronx with her cousin. And then you have Fierce, that's his stage name. And he is, he's Dominican, but born and raised in New York. And so, and he's spending the summer with his father uptown in the Bronx as well. And then they meet, right? And what I love about Fierce is that he is, he's half Dominican and half Black. And he loves music. He's the poet. He's the singer. He's a wannabe bachata singer. And and so he knows how to woo the girls. He goes around with his guitar. This is what he does. And he knows that this summer is going to be all about that life. But then he meets Yuri, and Yuri is not about that life. And Yuri awakens in him something about his denial of this gift, as he's sort of like tossing it, so freely, when his gift is really about, I think she tells him, your gift is meant to move mountains. It's not to just, so it's a shift. And so they meet, and it's it's that kind of like the emerging of a love story, but it's also this concept of the denial, right? For Fierce, he denies his gift, but he also has, he thinks that his music is just something frivolous, but in fact it's what will sustain him and save him. So, there's supernatural obstacles, but there's also the everyday obstacles that they both live, and definitely with Fierce being, Black, that he has to like overcome, right? And this is something that young people do all the time. But I wanted the mixture of both the supernatural and the realities of what life looks like for a young person of color, a young Black kid, both these kids having to overcome. And so it was great. And they all, for me, Fierce reminds me a lot of people that I know, of my cousins, of that I grew up with. That music really ties really strongly to salvation, to being saved.
It is powerful. And their gifts in both books, the gifts are not just something that's for fun, and some people kind of think of it as just distraction from the real work of living. But I think what both of y'all have done is weave together this idea that these gifts that we might have, they're different for each person, that they're actually our pathway to salvation, to becoming our true selves, and to living the lives that we should live, that we should allow ourselves to live, right? Because sometimes don't we hold ourselves back? I think so.
Definitely. I mean, as writers, right? I don't know, like it wasn't something that I was supposed to be doing as a creative person. I'm supposed to, work to make money, and finding a way of even being able to be an author is, that's not something that I take for granted. It's my gift, and I and I have to cultivate it, and I have to and give it as much love as possible as well.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of some of the work that Yamile's done with some other projects, right? Las Musas, I was reading about. That looks amazing.
Yes, that was the brainchild of Aida Salazar, and Aida and I met at an SCBWI conference, which is the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and we were both brand new. We had actually met virtually on a Facebook group for writers of color. And so we had books coming out in 2018, and because of different circumstances, we were late to sign up for one of those debut groups that are so popular, like the Roaring 20s last year, or our year would have been 2018. And so we decided, instead of, and there were other Latina authors in the same situation. And so we said, why don't we just join our efforts? Because sometimes we were told many times, both of us and many other Latina authors, when we were trying to find an agent or a home for our books, we were told, oh, we already have another Latina. And so we're, like always, every time you hear that, and then you know that a Latina author gets a book contract, that would be like your competition getting, the break that you're looking for. So we wanted to switch the narrative into, instead of being competitors for the same little piece of the pie, we would just lift each other's voices. So we started with like 5 authors at the time, and now there are so many that I lost count, and we've added Las Madrinas, and Lilliam, you're a madrina, right? and Las Tías and Las Hermanas, and we have Latina editors who are mentoring people who want to get into the industry. So it became a wonderful organization that also, it's been a great place to have difficult conversations. And we were talking about colorism. And I was talking with another author friend who is collaborating on a project with me too, and she's also part of Las Musas. And we were saying how, in the Latino community, we have all these divisions, because unlike other different cultures in which you can, label them by the color of their skin or other physical features, with Latina people, we come in we're not a race, we're just a cultural group. And so it makes it so different sometimes to be more unified and instead of competing against different factions, right? And so we've had wonderful conversations with Las Musas about colorism and what it really means to be a Latina person versus a Hispanic person, right? And what kind of stories are we telling? Although most of us have indigenous ancestry, can we tell the stories of the indigenous people from our countries if we're not part of those communities? I mean, very interesting conversations that were not happening a few years ago, and now I don't know, make me excited to see the things that are coming out in the future. And again, forming this marketing collective that showed that although we all have the label of Latina or Latine or Latinx, we all have different stories to tell, and each one of our stories are important because we show the Latina experience living in Latin America or in the United States or everywhere else from our own perspective. So when you were asking Lilliam about the colorism in her book, Esperanza, I just wanted to add that that's why I wrote my author's note in Furia, specifying why I was hoping the reader would not go with an American perception of color in Latin America. We didn't have a civil rights movement in the 1960s like they did here in the US. We were going through our own crises, and we were going through a dictatorship after a dictatorship. So I have in Furia, one of her nicknames is Negra because of the color of her skin is darker. And that was my nickname growing up too. Or sometimes people would call me Turca because my grandfather was from Syria. And so the connotation of this nickname is very different in the Latin American experience. But at the same time, I wanted to open up a conversation of colorism, why we use the word, because it's an endearment, but also what are the ramifications or the subtext, like when you call somebody gordita or flaquita. I mean, the nicknames that we use in our communities, right?
And yeah, no, that's such a good conversation, because it's and it's a conversation that I've had with people from the Bronx, like, I grew up with hip hop, and hip hop, and that community is, you're Latino and you're hip hop. It feeds into this idea of like, who can say the N-word? Is that okay? I grew up with my brothers saying that amongst their friends, and our community used to be Black and brown. So it's just this really interesting conversation to have about this idea of like what is allowed and what is not allowed now, and how we have to change. Like, we have to elevate, we have to change. Language is never static. It's like we move, and so it's super fascinating to me to have those kind of conversation as well with my own family. Yeah, I love that.
Yes.
It's hard conversations.
They're hard conversations, but I feel like we need to have them, because otherwise we're not going to evolve. We're not going to change our perception, or we're not going to have, we're not going to grow as a community. And so in my author's note, I wanted to make sure that people knew that I told this story of Furia from my own perspective. My brothers are much lighter skinned than I am, and they had different nicknames from mine. In fact, one of them was called Rubio pretty much all of his life, or, like when he came to the States, he was a Güero. And we're brothers from the same mother and father. But, like in the same family, you might have people with different skin colors, and their experiences navigating the world, either in the United States or Latin America, would be very different from each other. But that's why I always say I'm hoping to hear from other Furias who have different perspectives. And that's why, I have a best friend who is Argentine of Chinese ancestry, to show the varieties. Sometimes when we think of Argentina as this melting pot, to use a common term, people always think about the European countries, but we have people that came from, and they still come from, all over the world. And their experiences as Argentines is as valid as somebody whose family has been there from the colonial times. So, I don't know, it was a fun experiment. And although all these things that I am commenting on now were not my main concern when I was writing, once I was revising, I made sure that I wanted to highlight certain aspects of the story.
And that depth just comes out so rich in the tapestry that you guys have painted in your individual books. And it kind of just bringing up the best friend reminds me of, what we're living in right now, right? That we're living in this moment of speaking about race and gender and white supremacy in this country. We wake up to having, women killed every day. And that's part of both of y'all's books, is this like actual, not history, but the present, right? Bringing in the news in a way that you don't always see in YA. YA often seems to be like, the books are often written in this kind of bubble, right? That is without time, without adults, without so many of the rules we live in life. And what I loved about both of y'all's books is that you firmly set them in the present, with the problems of the present, and with the characters reacting to those realities. Even Lilliam, your book is, I'm sure some people connect it or talk about it with connection to magical realism, right? But how do you feel about that? Because the realism's there and the magic's there. So, but I don't know if you consider it part of that. I know bringing that reality is so crucial to the storytelling. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I didn't think about the term magical realism. I don't know, like I think I was on a panel in the beginning of the year about that idea, the concept of magical realism. I've read so many, and obviously, but to me, the magical and the spiritual kind of goes hand in hand. So I believe in those things. Maybe my kids don't, but but I do. I believe that my ancestors are with us. I believe that that there are no coincidences. The father says in the book that everything is tied together. We're all tied together. So so the magical realism aspect of it is that I wanted her to really embody Yuri's mindset of the spiritual happening all the time with her. Like, she's being followed by an angry spirit, and that is really what is causing her a lot of anguish. And I did it, but I didn't want it to play around with, there were two separate things happening, that she was being followed by an angry spirit named Otto, but she's also suffering from PTSD, and that is very real. And those two things I didn't want to, I wanted to try to make sure that I wasn't overlapping in that sense, that that she's suffering, and that she needed help, and she needed professional help, and she needed the spiritual, so both. I really magical aspects was just, that's the way I see Puerto Rico. That's the way I see a lot of my place, like for the Bronx and New York, I see them all as these beautiful otherworldly places. If you look, if you stand and still and you'll see the signs that there's this kind of magical beauty around,
Yes.
So that's.
I guess the real is like what you were talking about, Atto, right? The spirit. But it's like that violence towards women, that idea of possession, that's very real also. So it's not just that the PTSD is real, but the spirit is embodying something that women deal with all the time. And you put it in the context of the spiritual world, but it happens in the physical world. And that reality is there. I read the book, and I listened to the books also because I love audiobooks. And my daughter was with me in the car when we were listening to part of it. And she said, that spirit is messed up, Mom. From the mouth of a 10-year-old, we know that. But she recognized that violence and that threat of violence towards women. And I feel like that, you're able to capture like that realness of that threat that many women experience, that comes out in Yamile's book, right? In a different way. But you express it through Atto, and that was very, very beautiful how you were able to capture that tension.
Thanks. Thank you. Like, I think you had mentioned it earlier that I didn't know what I was writing about, and I didn't understand that until later, until the book came out. And then I was like, oh, this is why I'm having such anxiety just even writing this book, is because I'm talking about a past experience with a abusive relationship. And so that concept of abuse and stalker and possession, and I didn't think about that until what you're going to be writing about until later.
Exactly. Yes, it's amazing the things that your subconscious will plant, and then once you go back on revision or even discuss in the book, because you talk about your story with sometimes your critique group or beta readers or even your editor, but it's not until you go into these deep conversations on a panel or something, or you hear somebody else's interpretation of it, that you realize all the connections that you were making without meaning to.
Right. Yeah. Like, I didn't, I knew I was struggling. Like, I knew it was painful. Whatever I was writing was painful, but I didn't realize until afterwards. I was like, oh, that's why it's so painful. I didn't, I was going to go there.
Like I've been studying the effects of emotions on the body, mainly because of self-preservation, because for obvious reasons, this year has been so hard for my, like mental health and even my physical health at a certain point. So I've been studying, how emotions affect your body. And I always tell the story of how when I was writing Furia, I was revising the scene with the father towards the climax of the story. And I was so scared of going there with my character because I did not want to go through the trauma of that confrontation. And my editor kept coming back and saying, we were, like almost about to send the book out to production. And she kept saying, oh, I want you to go deeper. I know you can go deeper because you've gone deeper in other scenes and this is the climax. We need to go deeper. And at that time, I started getting a pain in my shoulder that I've had pretty much all of my life, I feel like. But it got to the point that I felt like I couldn't write. I couldn't sit down to revise this scene. And so I was going to a chiropractor at the time who worked with energy. And again, some people don't believe in this, but I do. and that day I told him that I was struggling with this scene. And so we worked on my shoulder, trying to displace the energy that was like trapped on my shoulder, fear and anxiety and PTSD, the emotions I did not want to feel. But I sat down after my session with the chiropractor and I went back into this scene, and I don't know how I tried to channel my ancestresses to help me. And that night I went to sleep and I woke up to this loud noise, like a thunder, like a cracking noise. It was my shoulder coming back to place. And I felt like I worked through the emotional baggage of this scene and my own personal history with these emotions. I couldn't really, I don't know, like get rid of this pain that I had. So I was physically and emotionally and mentally blocked to work on the scene. And then until I couldn't work through the emotions, I couldn't heal physically or work on the story. So it was a very visual and physical representation of what the process is like.
Yeah, the physical, that I've been thinking about that a lot with this book, is how it physically manifested the pain within me, and I totally relate to what you're saying. Like I went through a lot of different weird, painful stuff. And I was writing, it became physically painful, in a way that I never, in my other books, I didn't go through,
Uh-huh.
Well, I can attest as a reader, I cried in both books, crying, ugly cry right there while I was reading for these characters. But what's amazing is you go to these places, both of you I don't want to say ladies, but lady, I don't know. We go there, you go there with our characters, right? And then there's this beautiful light, and the light's really there throughout. It doesn't stop shining. So I don't want people that are hearing us to think that these stories are too pesado or they're depressing. They're not depressing. Both books have this beautiful theme of hope that is so inspiring. I think I was sitting reading thinking, what would I have done if I had this book? When I was this age, I needed this book. I needed this book. I needed these books. So thank you for writing these books for my daughter and for all the mujeritas and mujeres and all the people that are going to be inspired by these books and feel the light of these characters shining so bright. And I don't want to say spoilers because I know that many of our listeners have not read this. So I kind of feel like if people don't want spoilers, maybe right now you want to turn off. I don't know. I'm just saying, if you don't like spoilers.
Cover your ears.
Yeah, cover your ears. Because I think we have to get to this idea. Both of y'all have this theme that we cannot wait for someone to save us. Even the love of our lives, right?
Exactly.
How did you both come to this obvious but still somehow difficult for people to grasp idea? Please tell me.
Well, I mean, the book is, if you know the tale of of Orpheus and Eurydice, then you know that there's a tragedy at the end, and that Orpheus is, he's supposed to go up and not look back, and Eurydice is supposed to be behind him, and of course homeboy decides that he's gonna look back, like he's, and then she's stuck in the underworld forever. I love that story. Because it's tragic and it's a Greek myth. Of course you expect it, but I needed to flip it in a way that makes sense for a modern retelling. And I kept on in my head, I kept on just thinking, they both need to let go and die. Something, part of them has to let go and then reemerge. So I kept on thinking about the idea of resurrection and saving yourself, and coming out anew. And so that was the theme. I knew I needed to change it. So yeah,
Yeah, and
No,
that's
no spoilers.
oh, you did good. You did good. I don't know. Because it's hard. It's hard not to spoil because that theme is so strong and it does really transform the myth, right? It really transforms it to something I think that can be very empowering. Because in the original, do we even hear that much of Eurydice? Not really, right?
No.
It's
No,
really
she's very
Orpheus's story.
quiet. Yes, it is. And this book, it's really mostly Yudi's story, even if it is told in alternating points of view. We are following Yudi's struggles more.
Absolutely.
Yes, and with Camila, I wanted to use football, which had been forbidden to her just for being a girl, as the tool and the medium that she uses to free herself from not only the things that had been holding her personally back, but all the women that had come before her. There's a line in the book that says that her family has been trapped in a hamster wheel of toxic love for generations. So her family love had been wielded as a weapon to destroy and to find the vulnerability in those people to submit them to their will, specifically the father. He used the love that the wife and the children had for him to keep them quiet and to keep them doing whatever he needed to get his goals. And so Camila wants to break away from that, and she's an optimist. So she believes in the concept of love, and Diego, the love interest, he's a good person, and they do love each other, but this happened. Their union kind of happened at the wrong time, when it was an obstacle more than a stepping stone for her. So I wanted to, and this is something that also Camila mentions, because she's aware that other younger girls are looking up to her for an example. And in the Argentine media or Latin American media, girls are told that to get out of, the hardships of life, you have to find yourself somebody who will support you, like a soccer player, like all the boys want to be soccer players or now reggaeton singers, and the girls, there'll be a model or a botinera, which is the girl that goes out with a soccer player because of botines, the boots. And so she didn't want to be that. She wanted there to be another option for her, and there is another option. And in my personal life, education was my way out of Camila's situation. And so Camila has a gift for soccer, and she's good at it, and she uses it to free herself and free her mom and the women around her, and also to show even the boy who loves her that she doesn't need to be saved, that she's a whole person already without having to wait for somebody. And it takes maturity. They're both, they're 18 and 19 by the end of the book. And maybe at that age, they didn't understand what her decision would mean. But when time goes by, they will understand that it was for the best. And, that he didn't have an obligation to go back and save anybody. And he can just be a cheerleader in her journey, like he was expecting her to be for him, So it was using love instead of a weapon, using it as a protection and the way to love yourself. So in the end, Furia is a love story, of course, with Diego, but most of it is Camila choosing herself first. And by liberating herself, she's helping the other women around her, like her mother, whom she had been very critical of because of the choices that she had made in her youth. They bring them, Camila's decision brings them together and liberates all of them from this generational trauma that they've all been experiencing.
Beautiful. We're so lucky you guys wrote these books. I love them. I can't wait to hopefully at some point see students in person and just shove them in their hands, because they will eat them up like the delicious dulce candy. But with nutrition, there's also so much better. I mean, were there any books that did this for you guys? I mean, I'm thinking back and I'm like, did I even read a book that had this kind of message for years? I mean, the stories were so known and retold. I mean, that sounds bad, but you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like,
Yes, and I think the books that did it for me were Isabel Allende's books, although they were not targeted to a young audience. She did write, she has that middle grade series, but came out when I was already an adult. But as a child, I remember reading The House of the Spirits and reading about the power that these women had for generations, even the ones that were the most vulnerable or sometimes felt powerless. In the end, you learned that by being spiritual and loving, like Clara, how she was like the columna, the column of that, the spine of that family that's ended up saving all of them. So I guess, like that kind of story has stayed with me and has made me into the writer that I am today, because I saw what was possible. So I was happy that I could, kind of show a little bit of what Isabel did for me and do it for a younger audience, hopefully.
I think for myself, for young adult books, I didn't see anything that I could connect with until I read like maybe Matt de la Peña's book and Meg Medina's book, which, I love Meg Medina so much. And so, but when I was growing up, I read like everyone, Sandra Cisneros, but Sandra Cisneros' story I really couldn't connect with it because it wasn't New York, it wasn't Bronx, it were Puerto Rican. But I connected to the idea of a girl or even her strong characters. Like I really connected to that. And so these are, people that I read, but when I was in high school, I would read Interview of the Vampire. I was reading all those trashy books. Were always in my mind thinking, oh, I envision, brown girls in the lead. I envision what that would look like. What if, it was a girl who was like, having to deal with alien invasions or having to deal with, a Greek myth retelling. I want to see that interpretation. So I always was reading those books, but always imagining them being retold anyway.
Well, and that just reminds me how you like to do a lot of things with genre, don't you, Lilliam? Like your books are not the same. Your books are not the same. You change it up each time.
Yeah, I get bored. No, I don't know. I grew up reading all those kind of genre books, monsters and scary stuff, and I've been injecting a little bit more of it into my own writing, and it's a really great way for me to tackle huge themes that I'm always thinking about, whether it's colorism, whether it's generational trauma, whether it's gentrification, all those things. I'm trying to figure out ways to write about those topics and incorporating some sort of, some sort of speculative, into it. It's my way of dealing with it. And so I'm always fascinated with it. So yeah, Never Look Back was, I think, the first time that I really did inject a lot of kind of like this speculative, magical kind of world. And it was fun. I love it.
Well, I want to add a little plug for a project that Lilliam and I and several other contributors are collaborating on. We have an anthology coming out in 2022 called Our Shadows Have Claws, and they're horror stories from our heritage. And we have a full lineup of all women. So we're reclaiming the horror genre and showcasing creatures from the folklore of our country. So I'm so excited for this project because we have.
I love it. It's it's just great. Whenever I get asked to do stuff like that, I'm like, this is perfect. I'm like, yes, another idea that I could explore and play around with, and how can I bring it up? And so it's always really fun to be able to do it. I'm really excited about the anthology as well.
Oh, and that sounds great. I'm going to have to buy it for my book club because I know they would love it. Us Chicanitos, we love scary stories.
Yes, we all do.
Llorona, there's a lot of stories, right? The Lechuza, we've got a lot of them.
Yes.
It's fun to be able to explore that stuff. So I'm so looking forward to it.
It'll be fun.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. And I know Yamile has done also a lot of different books. Your first book, I love the title of it.
Where are you from?
Yes, where are you from?
Yeah,
I've gotten that as well, even though, it comes around, right?
Exactly. There, not a day
Yes.
goes by. I've lived in the United States now for 24 years, and I think every day I get asked at least once. Not so much this last year because I haven't really left my house. But even when people come to my house, usually the first question is, "Oh, where are you from?" You know. So, "Where are you from?" came about in a very serendipitous way. It was just a poem that I wrote for my children, because when people ask me, although I've been an American citizen for a long time, I always say I'm from Argentina, because the heart wants what it wants, right? Like I was made there, was created there. That's home for me. For my husband, that's Puerto Rico. And for our children, I saw in their eyes that they never knew what to say. And so once again, that was something, a piece of writing that was very personal and specific, and I was just floored by the reception of how it resonated with so many people. So I just love to have the opportunity, like Lilliam said, to explore all these topics through different angles for different audiences, because these are questions that and we can find the answers to these questions when we're an adult in a picture book or a middle grade or a short story in an anthology. Because although we target our writing for specific audiences, everybody can read these books and everybody can benefit from them, even if you're not a person of Latina heritage. Especially if you're not a person of Latina heritage, there will be a lot of things that will be new to you and that will benefit your life, at least show you a different aspect of what it means to be a human.
Exactly. The humanity that we all share, despite our
Mhm.
differences, or maybe because of them, right?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you so much. Well, besides these two amazing books that people here in, oh, excuse me, people here in San Antonio can get from the Nowhere bookstore, you guys have such a long list of books, and I hope that the people that have heard you today just go and rush out and buy all of them, or recommend them to the public library,
Yes.
because I know we have two amazing public library systems here, and they need to have all the books by you two, because they're
Yes.
just going to give so much more light to us, so much more knowledge. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Yes, and that's the thing. For a long time, we've been hearing the message that we need diverse books. I feel like the books are there now. They just need to reach their audience. It kills
Yeah.
when young readers don't even know these books exist because they're for them.
Yeah, exactly. And the libraries, we love libraries. We love indie bookstores. I'm just all like, just spend your money on indie bookstores, because they're also like our community centers as well.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Exactly.
So thank you so much for having us.
This was fantastic.
Thank you.